I would like to introduce our first speaker that will be joining us by video from Tehran, Mahbube Ramazanian. Her 18-year-old son was shot 5 times by the regime's security forces on her street.
با درود خدمت همه عزیزان، من محبوب رمضانی مادر جاویدنام پژمان قلی‌پور هستم.
In my own homeland. For the past 19 months, I've been trying to find out who killed my son and why. I'm a seeking justice mother, but I've been branded as a criminal just because I'm seeking justice for the murder of my son. I am threatened, and I've been told that if I continue to pursue, I'll be taken away where no one can find me. I just have one statement for human rights activists. Murderers and victims seems to have changed places in the judicial system of my country, where a plaintiff's plea is deemed to be a criminal act. All I have asked is for them to tell me who killed my son and in what capacity. I talked to him at 7:30 in the evening. Then the authorities told me he was killed at 7:40. There are city security cameras at the location where my son was killed. I have asked to watch the footage. They told me the cameras were not working that day. So how do they know that he was killed at 7:40 p.m. on that day? They even tell me that he was just part of the crowd and that he was innocent. Then why was he killed? Despite my inquiry for the past 19 months, why hasn't anybody told me who the killer is? Thousands of other young men like my son were killed in the student protests of November and December 2019. Are there really any organizations working on human rights? Why don't they help us? Why don't they hear our voices? Who can we turn to in this world? How many more crimes should be committed for anyone to notice? My only request is for you to hear the voice of these grieving families and take actions. We want nothing more than to identify our children's killers and bring them to justice.
ولی صدای ما باشید، به داد ما برسید. ما داد خواهیم. ما چون داد خواهیم مجرمیم. به داد ما برسید. ممنونم ازتون.
Our next speaker is the Honorable Mr. Bijan Kian, twice Senate confirmed former member of the Board of Directors of U.S. Export-Import Bank, a former member of the White House Business Council, reporting directly to 2 U.S. presidents from both major political parties.
Good morning, Sarah, and distinguished members on this panel. Happy to be here, and I want to thank you for inviting me. Today, I'd like to start by remembering the names and memory of the innocent souls who were murdered by the world's strongest state sponsor of terrorism, the Islamic Republic in Iran. You remember Nedara Sultan, we just heard about Pejman Qolipour from a grieving mother, others, Sattar Beheshti, Navid Afkari, and many more. Thousands of innocent lives were taken by the Islamic Republic. So we start our talk with them in mind. And then today, what I'd like to talk about is what is the Islamic Republic? Islamic Republic is an octopus with many tentacles, a very, very formidable enemy of freedom and liberty. Why is it that over the past 42 years, a regime that oppresses its own people, harasses its neighbors, and poses a threat to international security has survived? What factors have helped the survival of this brutal kleptocracy, inept, corrupt regime? Well, the warriors, let's start with them. The quality of the warriors. Warriors have been fighting this monster with minimum resources. It's very difficult. These fighters are inside Iran. They're fighting courageously every day. They're willing to die to get their freedom. And then the head of the diplomacy in the Islamic Republic shamelessly stares at the camera and says, this is the life they have chosen. Really, they've chosen to die for freedom. That's what they voted for. This is what your independence and freedom slogan meant in the beginning of the Islamic Republic. No, they're determined. They're courageous. They're fighting. But who are they fighting? Are they fighting just the Islamic Republic? No, they're fighting the Islamic Republic plus a group of money grabbers who care about nothing but the money they can make. They play both sides. On the one side, they're advising the leaders of the Islamic Republic. On the other side, they're drafting the JCPOA for the United States consideration. It's really amazing how this happens. They get paid by the enemy of the United States to aid the United States in fighting the enemy. This would have been funny if it wasn't so sad. So I just could go through a list of the money grabbers, but those who are observing closely know exactly who I'm talking about. They're both in Tehran and capitals in Europe and actively speaking on behalf of the Islamic Republic rulers. So they play a role in this survival for the Islamic Republic in Iran. And now let's go to the other group, the intellectuals. Same intellectuals who thought back in 1979 that the most important issue was to write a dissertation about lifting the water pick, or the old aftabe, with the right hand and using the left hand in doing what one has to do in the lavatory. They're learned men. They had gone to school and learned many things, but their minds were mired with this kind of thinking. And of course, it matched the ruler, the leader of the Islamic Republic, Ayatollah Khomeini. I said at one point that the only technology, he had no idea what was going on in the real world. The only technology he was very familiar with was the technology of a water pick, the aftabe. And of course, when we put all of this together, we see in the battlefield, on the one side, the world's strongest state sponsor of terrorism with oil and other resources that come not from legitimate sources, but from drug trafficking, from human trafficking. And that's the way the Islamic Republic pays their proxy fighters wherever they are to create havoc in Lebanon, in Yemen, in Syria, harassing the Middle East neighbors, and of course call for America's strongest ally in the Middle East, Israel, the state of Israel. So all of this is happening, and the warriors have to fight all of these sources, a network of university professors, nonprofit organizations who hang around with the international conferences with the Islamic Republic delegates. It's just so mind-boggling when we observe this. So maybe we should pay attention to who else is helping the Islamic Republic to stay in power for so long. So on the other side of the field, confronting the Islamic Republic are the warriors, the real people, the brave people of Iran with very little resources. We could see the workers, we could see women at the forefront of the fight against the tyranny of Islamic Republic. And it's hard. It's hard when you have just a few arrows in your quiver and you have to really face the Goliath. So what do? Well, you have to look at the weaknesses. We talked about the eye of Esfandiar, which is the equivalent of Homer's Achilles' heel. Ferdowsi, the great Persian poet, in his epic masterpiece, Shahnameh, describes the effects of the Eye of Isfandiar. Very similar to the Achilles heel. So what will bring down the Islamic Republic? I'd like to mention a number of possible factors that would be the weakest points of the Islamic Republic. Let's start with the instrument that the Islamic Republic has been relying on. It throws this document in the face of whoever questions their behavior by saying, this is my constitution. This is what the Iranian people selected to live under. And that constitution is the greatest barrier to freedom. This is a wall that is between the freedom-seeking people of Iran and their enemy, their own government, Islamic Republic in Iran. Now, when we talk about the battlefield and the number of limited arrows, and we take a look at the Constitution as the greatest weakness. This is a Constitution that treats Iranian people as subjects, as invalids who need a guardian. The Constitution says you, as Iranians, are not competent enough to be able to make decisions for yourself. You need a guardian. A Constitution that looks at the natural resources of Iran as war booty belonging to the 12th Imam. And until his appearance, whatever that is, the power of holding the control over these assets, the natural resources, is with the unelected, self-appointed supreme leader who calls himself the ruler of Iran today from the Islamic Republic. People of Iran must make a decision to write their own constitution. Start with this line. All people in Iran, men and women, have equal rights, absolute equal rights, with no conditions, with no need to align or correspond to any customs, religion, or any other provision of Sharia law. People of Iran have rejected wholesale this institution, its constitution, its related entities, and all there is attached to it. It's time that this is looked at as a point of weakness for the Islamic Republic. People of Iran should be writing their own constitution. The Free Iran Constitution would set the rules that they like to live under, and then they can show the world, this is how we want to live. So saying no to Islamic Republic was essential. Now the world needs to know what the Iranian people really want. And there's no other way than for them, not somebody in Pentagon, not somebody in the United States or Europe or anywhere else, to write their own constitution. They wanted to have a safe platform to do this. That safe platform has been offered by the Institute for Voices of Liberty. Now, Institute for Voices of Liberty exists not to tell the Iranian people, not to tell those warriors what to do or how to fight. They know much better than anybody can ever tell them. We exist to ask them, tell us, how can we help you? And we listen carefully. Whatever the Institute does is following exactly the voices of the Iranian people. You could say the boss of the Institute is the Iranian people and the freedom-seeking Iranian people. Who are the freedom-seeking Iranian people? Those are the individuals who have rejected and denounced the entirety of the Islamic Republic without any doubt or hesitation. Those are the voices that the Institute reflects. So we move on to the second possible Achilles heel of the Islamic Republic, women of Iran. The day that the veiled woman decides to protect the rights of the woman who chooses not to wear the veil, that's a bad day for Islamic Republic. That is the biggest weakness because of the first line of that Free Iran Constitution that I just recited for you. And by the way, that line didn't come from me. It came from the people of Iran. They're courageous. They know what they want. They just want the freedom to be able to define their destiny and their future. We move on to the third weakness, to the third Achilles heel, if you would. And that is the day that the armed forces of the Islamic Republic decide that the future is bleak if they continue to attach themselves to the tyrant. They have safety waiting for them if they return to the arms of the people of Iran, those who they need to protect, the country, the land, the integrity of the country is what they're charged to do. They wore those uniforms to protect the country, not a brutal regime that kills its own people and threatens its neighbors. That is also a weakness, and we should all be thinking about what would it take to encourage them to return to the arms of the people. When we move on to the other possibilities to find Achilles' heel of the Islamic Republic, we must remember the atrocities of the regime. We must help bring to the attention of world leaders. You're doing business with a brutal regime that kills its own people. If you choose freedom, you stay with the people of Iran. If you choose to do business with the tyrant, murderers, you will not be forgiven by the people of Iran. And remember, this clerical regime is under no obligation to stand with its commitments. The commitments they generate are not worth the paper they're written on. And yet, as we know, JCPOA offers no commitment. So we also reach out. The last, perhaps, on the list of Achilles' heel of Islamic Republic is to remind countries like Germany, yes, you have a 15% year-over-year dual trade with the Islamic Republic. Yes, in the short run, if you stop this trade, you will lose. But in the long run, you will win. Because the people of Iran are a much more reliable partner for you than possibly the Islamic Republic. A shaken, failing government is not a good business partner for you. That is our message. This is a message that the people of Iran wish for us, all of us, to be able to convey to world leaders. Don't do business with this regime. It's not going to be a sustainable partnership. Choose your partners wisely. That is the message. Now, I'd like to finish by sharing a little story that was shared with me by my colleague, Dr. Jalali, at the Institute. She said, look, we face a tall wall, and this wall is the wall of the power and the might and the money of the Islamic Republic. We have a small hammer. The small hammer is no match for the tall wall. I also have a sledgehammer, but I can't lift the sledgehammer. So what do? I will look for cracks in the wall that my small hammer can actually deal with and bring this wall down. And I found that to be the wise advice, to be able to look for the cracks. There are many. We should look for the cracks in the structure of Islamic Republic because it's corrupt. Institutionalized corruption, ineptitude, kleptocracy, and almost at the end of the rope. The cracks are there. Let's find them. And let's use the small hammer to bring this wall down. Thank you, and I look forward to some questions.
Thank you so much, Bijan, for your very powerful statement. And thank you for your service to the United States of America and for pointing out the importance of the Constitution. Our next speaker will be joining us via video from Kermanshah, Iran, Kamran Asa. His 25-year-old brother, Kianush Asa, was shot during a peaceful demonstration in 2009. Security forces took him away. He was missing for 9 days before his body was discovered in a Tehran morgue.
کامران آسا هستم، برادر جانباخته شهید کیانوش آسا. برادرم 25 سالش بود، دانشجوی
My name is Cameron Asa, martyr Kianush Asa's brother. Kianush was 25 years old, studying in his final quarter of petrochemical engineering at the Science and Technology University in Iran. On June 15, 2009, he participated in the nationwide demonstrations in Tehran, where, according to official sources, over 3.5 million people took it to the streets protesting against the unbearable, inhumane living condition in Iran. Security forces opened fire to demonstrations. According to his friends and classmates, he was shot once on the periphery, but he seemed to be all right. From the information we gathered through our investigation, the security forces transferred all dead and injured bodies altogether to Rasul Akram Hospital. At the time, we checked all hospitals and inquired from every government and security offices, but no luck. After 9 days, we found his dead body at the city morgue, but not in the condition as his friends had described, that he had sustained injuries only by one bullet. In fact, his corpse had sustained multiple wounds during the days when he was missing. He had suffered various other injuries. It has been 12 years since his murder, and we still don't know how and why he was killed. My family, my mother, 2 sisters, and I have been constantly persecuted, all because we have continued to inquire about his death. I was also imprisoned in various locations: in Dizelabad prison in Kermanshah, in Evin prison in Tehran, in Qazalhisar prison in Karaj County. We wrote several letters to the head of the Islamic Republic Parliament, Chief of Justice, to the members of House of Representatives, yet we have not received any response. The only thing they've said is that they are willing to pay us blood money, but they haven't done anything prosecuting the case. All we've asked for is that our case to be investigated for the truth to come to light. Any corner we've resorted to said that our brother's file has been classified. Why the classification? Why the secrecy? They have neither allowed us nor our lawyers to access his file. We will accept nothing but to identify those who are responsible for this criminal act, particularly those who've ordered the shooting of many innocent souls like Kianush. We urgently expect all human rights organizations to hear our voices and thousands of other families like us, to listen to our pleas and extend their hands for help.
و به قانون و به دست قانون سپرده بشن. از همه سازمان‌های حقوق بشری انتظار داریم به فریاد ما، به فریاد خانواده ما و خانواده‌های مثل ما برسن.
Our next speaker is Dr. Amir Hamidi. He'll be joining us via Zoom, and he'll be speaking about Iran's role in global terrorism. Mr. Hamidi is an internationally recognized expert in national security and global terrorism, highly decorated over the course of his 36 years of distinguished service. He consistently represented the U.S. Department of Justice and supported the prosecution of a broad range of both domestic and international crimes. Dr. Hamidi is also considered an expert on Middle East affairs. He devotes his time and expertise to raising awareness about the brutality and human rights violations committed by the Islamic Republic. Thank you, Dr. Hamidi, for your service, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, the National Press Club. Thank you, Ms. Kesrai. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am honored and humbled to address the members of the media, speakers, and the guests. On behalf of millions of Iranians, I would like to relay their voices and their dire circumstances. Islamic Republic of Iran continues to be one of the most brutal and oppressive regimes in the world, and the leading implementers of the death penalty. Iran is also the leading state-sponsored terrorism, as Honorable Kian beautifully addressed. Since the inception, the Islamic Republic of Iran has shown their tendencies 9 months into the regime. They stormed the American embassy in Tehran, held 52 hostages for 444 days. Since then, this regime wants to export Islam globally. They started their terror machine with the security intelligence forces, creating the Sepah Quds or Quds forces and IRGC. They bombed both the American and French military base in Beirut and Khobar Tower in Saudi Arabia, and also caused explosion in Argentina, Thailand, India. They also conspired to assassinate the Saudi ambassador in the United States. The IRGC controls the customs and all ports, both by land, sea, and by air, to conduct drug trafficking, smuggling, and money laundering globally. The IRGC has implemented costly enrichment project and the production of missile weapons for nuclear use and military intervention in the Middle East. They also deliver modern weapons and large financial and logistical donations to the terrorist organizations such as Hezbollah, Hamas, and Islamic Jihad. Militant groups such as the Popular Mobilization in Iraq, the Kata'ib Party in Iraq, the Al-Ashtar Brigades in Bahrain, the Taliban in Afghanistan, the Houthis in Yemen, and terrorist groups in Africa, South America, and finally, protection of Bashar al-Assad in Syria. It has left Iran deprived of its wealth and poverty, unemployment, hunger, homelessness, prostitution, addiction, suicide, and organ trafficking are prevalent among the Iranian people. Iran had executed at least tens of thousands of people since 1980 on a vaguely defined national security crimes of enmity against God, growing corruption on earth, and armed rebellion, and hundreds of people on espionage charges. Iran courts fall short of providing fair trials and use confession obtained under torture and evidence in a court. Authorities have failed to meaningfully investigate numerous allegations of torture against detainees. Authorities routinely restrict detainees' access to legal counsel, particularly during the initial investigation period. The IRGC intelligence organizations continues to arrest Iranian dual and foreign national on vague charges as cooperating with a hostile state. Iran continues to repress their own people. Iran has not stopped or confronted these serious rights violations, while Khamenei continues to greenlight this rampant abuse. The longtime prosecutor and present Chief Justice of Iran, Ebrahim Raisi, is selected by Khamenei as Iran's rigged president. As we all know, the Raisi has been accused of a variety of well-documented crimes against humanity. The climax of this bloody decade occurred in 1988, when several thousand political prisoners were slaughtered and subjected to a collective purge. The bloodbath was orchestrated and implemented by a 4-person committee known as Death Squad by Iranians, appointed by the first leader of Iran, Khomeini, the death squad, was mandated to exterminate all political prisoners who had previously been subject to unfair legal proceedings and were serving their prison sentences. Despite of serving their sentences, the prisoners were merely asked whether they still held their political opinions for which they had previously been charged and tried. If they answered affirmatively, they were executed on an extrajudicial basis. Based on extensive evidence, President-elect Raisi, who was a member of the four-person committee on the death squad, has openly admitted his role in such extrajudicial proceedings without ever showing any remorse for having assumed an indispensable role in the regime's crime against humanity. Iranian citizens have rightfully boycotted the Islamic Republic elections in Iran because they are corrupt, fraudulent, and rigged. This oppressive and evil regime wants to retain control and do so through illegitimate means. Given Raisi's display of impunity, a majority of Iranians wants Raisi prosecuted by an international criminal court instead of fraudulently declared the victor in Iran's presidential election. The judiciary and intelligence agencies continue to use several overly broad articles of penal code, such as propaganda against the state, assembly and collusion to act against national security, insulting the supreme leader, this is so funny, and establishing of membership in group to disrupt national security to prosecute activists and human rights defenders. Authorities have prosecuted at least 200 people who participated in protests against the IRGC downing of the Ukrainian airliner on January 8, and government's initial false denial of responsibility. Judiciary Chief and President-elect Raisi described himself as a defender of human rights, but his involvement in the 1988 mass execution of several thousand political prisoners, but as we all know, he is a mass murderer. This is like putting a bank robber as a bank manager. Before even he gets sworn in his office, Raisi said, the United States must lift all oppressive sanctions against Iran. When asked about Iran's ballistic missile program and its support of regional militias, Raisi described the issues as non-negotiable. Raisi, a follower of Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, has been sanctioned by the United States over his involvement in the mass execution. As such, Iranian demands the international community heed to concerns of Iranian citizens and consider the most appropriate means to hold Raisi to account for his heinous crimes. The United Nations and all leaders of powerful and civilized nations should condemn the current Iranian regime and prosecute him for being leading state sponsor of terrorism, human rights violation, and crimes against humanity. I thank you allowing me to speak for you here, and because I believe it is an honor to address these very critical issues facing Iranian citizens today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hamidi. Our next speaker is Hamid Qaragozlu, U.S. Representative, International Organization to Preserve Human Rights, chair of Iran Action Group at the International Religious Freedom Roundtable, advocate for religious, ethnic, and activist rights, and today he will be addressing the horrific human rights record of the regime as proven by the appointment of Raisi as president and the role in the reaction of the international community towards the regime.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's an honor. And my deepest gratitude and appreciation of brave people of Iran who have endured so much. To paint a clear picture of the current reality in Iran, I highlight several points. Iran has the most educated population in the region, second only to Israel. There are over 17 million Iranians with college degrees or greater. Iran is the 5th richest country in the world in terms of natural resources. More than 2/3 of Iranians were either children at the time of the revolution or were born after the revolution and have therefore not experienced any other form of government. And despite a lifetime of intense indoctrination and brainwashing starting in elementary school, the vast majority of Iranians, over 90%, as clearly indicated in the last presidential election, desire a regime change and a representative democratic form of government, one that not only respects but also protects the rights of all groups and individuals. Despite such vast human and natural resources, Iran holds the top spot in the world for executions and hangings in relative terms, including juveniles, and second only to China, a country with 17 times Iran's population in absolute terms. Iran holds the top spot for brain drain. Iran consistently ranks among the worst countries with respect to its rampant and systematic corruption, misery index, rate of poverty, and drug addiction. The primary source of the distribution of highly addictive and dangerous drugs at very low prices and primarily among the frustrated youth is the occupying regime in Iran. Drugs are used as a means to prevent uprising among young people. Iran is the only country in the world where the sale of organs and body parts is not only legal, but is in fact facilitated by the government. For a mere few dollars, the young, educated, and unemployed are driven to sell their organs as a temporary relief from the abject poverty imposed on them. This regime is the only one in the world that has weaponized COVID-19 against its own population, creating a human crisis of epic proportion in order to survive, killing at least 400,000 Iranians so far. The average life expectancy in Iran, regardless of gender, is about 7 years, which means that every generation of Iranians is collectively robbed of more than 1 billion years of life. The occupying regime in Iran is one of the primary sponsors of terrorism around the world. It is after the inception of this regime that all the known terrorist groups in the world, apart from PLO, came into existence, turning this regime into the primary destabilizing force in the Middle East and elsewhere, threatening democratic values and human rights the world over. And tragically, this has been accomplished at a great expense to its primary victim, people of Iran. This evil regime was founded on the blood of innocents and continues to survive on the same fodder. In 1978, to reignite his stalled unholy revolution, Khomeini's agents changed the exit doors of Rex movie theater in Abadan, shot and set it on fire, burning to death 468 children, women, and men in the process, and blaming it on the Shah's government. Soon after Khomeini seized power, the mass execution of high-ranking military and government officials ensued, followed by a devastating, lengthy war with Saddam Hussein, which was ignited by Khomeini himself. A war that was intentionally prolonged for 8 years to exhaust the nation to a point that they could not be able to rise and topple this evil regime. A war that cost about 1 million lives and casualties on the Iranian side and 600,000 lives and casualties on the Iraqi side. Then the mass execution of political prisoners and activists followed, where in a span of only a few short months, tens of thousands of people were executed and buried in unmarked mass graves. And shortly after that, the top political activists, writers, journalists, and prominent leaders of religious minorities were assassinated. The recently appointed president of Khamenei's regime, Ebrahim Raisi, along with the newly appointed head of the judiciary, Mohseni Ejei, both played a prominent role in these mass murders. Since the inception of the regime, half the population of Iran, the Iranian women, have been subjected to the vilest draconian treatments by barbaric misogynistic mullahs. They have been forced to wrap themselves in sermons called hijab, a concept that actually does not exist in the Holy Quran. Thousands of Iranian women have been jailed, tortured, raped, and murdered. Many have been maimed by acid attacks for standing up to their oppressors. At the same time, these same mullahs run a vast network of brothel houses across Iran through a convoluted and evil concept called temporary marriages, which can be as short as only a few minutes. These predatory brothel houses carry out several objectives. One is the entertainment of the regime's allies and cronies in the region, and two, as a front to trap desperate and destitute young women for human trafficking and sex slavery. By fragmenting the population into many different groups, mullahs have managed to foster division and distrust across different segments of society, causing each individual group to be consumed by its own survival against the oppressive policies of the government. For example, Shiites are divided into those who adhere to the concept of velayat faqih, the absolute rule of the supreme leader, and those who do not. Gonabadi Sufis, a Shiite Sufi group numbering in millions, close to 10 million, are not even classified as Muslims. The over 20 million Iranian Sunnis are broken up based on their ethnicities. Religious minorities, Zoroastrians, Christians, Jews, Baha'is, Mandavis, and other Sufi groups face the same challenges. Thousands of activists and dissidents have been murdered, and thousands more, such as Nasruddin Sotoudeh, Mohammad Nourizad, Hashem Khasdar, and Sohail Arabi, are wasting away under daily torture in the dungeons of the regime. Up to now, Khamenei's regime has managed to survive by destroying a sense of unity and cohesiveness that should exist among the population at large. But through years of trials and tribulations, Iranians have finally come to the realization that they are all in this together, suffering at the hands of a common enemy, and that unity is the secret to success, as proven by Gonabadi Sufi's monumental achievement in 2009. On February 21st, 2009, inspired by the teachings of their spiritual leader, the late Dr. Noorali Tabande, tens of thousands of Gonabadi Sufis from all across Iran gathered in front of the parliament to peacefully protest against the vicious oppression they had endured. Up until then, hopelessness and a grave-like silence had ruled the lives of a nation under siege, much like the Soviet Union of Stalin era. But Sufis' protests broke the facade of Khamenei's regime's absolute power and proved to the people of Iran, and the whole world for that matter, that it is possible to stand up to even the most vicious oppressor through unity and peaceful protest, and pave the way for others to follow. A few months later, after the election results of 2009, Iranians of all walks of life, inspired by Gonabadi Sufis' unimaginable accomplishment, poured into the streets peacefully protesting the sham elections that had pulled Mahmoud Ahmadinejad out of a magic hat as the elected president of Iran, a monumental event that came to be known as Green Movement. And in order to remain in power and survive, mullahs have ravaged Iran's economy and granted lucrative and one-sided contracts and concessions primarily to Russia, UK, France, Germany, and China at bargain basement prices, with Russia controlling the northern half of Iran and the vast oil and natural gas resources of the Caspian Sea, and China controlling the southern half of Iran through the Persian Gulf, with its strategic location and vast resources, ensuring a limitless supply of oil and natural gas to feed its industrial and military expansionist ambitions. The world faces the grim reality of China as the preeminent economic and military superpower, Russia as a major destabilizing force all across the globe, and a nuclear terrorist regime occupying Iran. The West's misguided policies gave us Khomeini, thereby turning Iran into the largest prison the world has ever seen. President Obama's ill-judged policies, directed by Khamenei's lobbyists, gave a renewed life to Khamenei and his regime at a time when the end to this nightmare was imminent. And now, despite Khamenei's appointment of a mass murderer as president, the international community has yet to officially condemn the sham elections that is in blatant violation of international law and cut off diplomatic and economic ties with an occupying force holding a nation hostage. These accounts are just a snapshot of the atrocities that the ordinary people of Iran endure every day. the frequency and severity of the injustices inflicted upon the people of Iran necessitates urgent action to hold the oppressive regime in Iran and the perpetrators of these crimes accountable. Over the past 42 years, despite being massacred every single time, through protest after protest to no avail, people of Iran have clearly demonstrated that this regime is incapable of reform and heedless of the will of its people. In this last election, the entire nation rose against its oppressors and sent a clear message to the world that Khamenei's regime has no legitimacy and is in fact an occupying force that has survived as long as it has because of the support of its backers, Russia, the EU, and China. It is incumbent upon the democratic nations of the world to be on the right side of history and stand by the people of Iran. A free and democratic Iran would benefit not only its people but the world at large, bringing stability and prosperity to the region and the world all over. And tragically, I have to also say that on December 24th, 2019, Khamenei managed to murder Dr. Tabande and replace him with his appointed person. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Garagozlu, for your thorough statement. Our next speaker, will be joining us from Tehran, Abbas Vahedian Sharhudi, one of the signatories to the statement of 14 activists, political prisoners out on bail, in and out of prison for the past 35 years.
درود بر شما. من عباس واحدیان شاهرودی هستم، فعال و زندانی سیاسی که فعلا به قید وثیقه آزادم.
Greetings to all. My name is Abbas Vahedian Sharhudi, an activist and political prisoner. I am free on bail at this time. I have been imprisoned multiple times over the past 35 years for various lengths of time. I have been in and out of different prisons. What all of them have in common is small, cramped cells of about 20 square meters, or about 80 square feet, where 80 prisoners are piled in together. The common halls that are about 2,000 square feet in area are no better, and more than 2,000 prisoners were kept in them. Over the past 35 years, I have received various degrees of physical torture that included over 230 floggings, several months of solitary confinement, and various other types of torture that are prevalent in Iranian prisons today. My most recent arrest was with the other 13 co-signers of what is known as the Statement of the 14. This group includes political and civil rights activists. In the statement, we demanded the resignation of the Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. I was placed in the general ward with criminals, not the special ward for political prisoners. Again, the intent was to clearly get rid of me through assassination. It is not enough for the regime to suppress us. They don't even spare our families. My wife was released from prison 2 months ago after being sentenced to 30 months. She was convicted on trumped-up charges along with other women activists who had signed the statement. My request from the media and journalists in the US and Europe, all who are here today and see my picture and hear my voice, is not to take reports of tragedies and routine violations of human rights lightly and dismiss them out of hand. We must learn from the incidences of the past few years in Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan that ushered in a flood of refugees to the West. Western leaders must keep in mind that the Islamic Republic is the mother of all the crises in the region. The world should stand in support of the Iranian opposition that believes in democracy and is comprised of educated individuals who have proven themselves capable, as evidenced by Iranian immigrants abroad, who have excelled in whatever field they have entered, be it economics, politics, technology, or business. They have proven to be peace-loving, trustworthy, and capable wherever they have settled. The world must trust the dynamic opposition leaders emerging in Iran. They have proven in recent years that they can stand up to this regime. They are capable in every respect and have a wealth of knowledge and experience. We look forward to a very constructive relationship with the free world. world. Our message to the leaders of the free world is believe in us. Believe that we can be a logical alternative to the Islamic regime. I beseech you to hear our voices, our cries, and to convey our message to the leaders of the world, particularly to President Joe Biden, who believes in democratic ideals and supports human rights. I personally believe President Biden understands our suffering and concerns. Help us wipe clean the bitter memories that the Iranian nation has of the wrong-minded interventions and mistakes the United States committed over the past decades. The Iranian opposition only asks that you do not provide financial resources to the Islamic Republic, resources that would make possible for their economic survival. This is the lifeblood of the regime. We ask that you pursue violators of human rights by preventing them and their families from working and thriving in Western countries. These are our only requests. Best wishes to you all, and thank you.
خوبان سلامتی و برای این جهان صلح و آرامش و امنیت رو آرزومندم. پایدار باشید.
Our next speaker is Dr. Mitra Babak, psychoanalyst, human rights activist, proponent of secular democracy in Iran. Dr. Babak will be speaking on the regime's use of Islamic law to justify their human rights violations. Thank you, Dr. Babak.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk about the crimes of Iranian regime at this important event. As a specialist psychotherapist working with so many traumatized people for over 22 years, I always look at the psychology from different perspectives: individuals, families, sociology, and the ideological, cultural, and political perspective. I'm glad that this time has been given to me to express and analyze the pain and the harm to the individual, families, and in the larger society of Iran. The government of Islamic Republic led by Khomeini and then Khamenei has been destroying Iran and the Middle East for over 42 years by inciting war and displacing the people of the region. This government, which I called Daesh of Shia, has caused so many traumas for millions, either by causing terrors, arrests, torture, mass public executions, rapes, hostages, and kidnappings. Truly, there is not enough time to present every crime committed by the regime yet. But I will try to lay out some recent well-known cases of different mental health issues like depression, anxiety, even post-traumatic stress disorder inflicted by the Iranian regime in my practice that shows the trauma. We will conclude that there is no difference between Iranian regime and ISIS. As a practicing psychotherapist, my patients have been mainly originate from traumas from their own countries of origin, but mainly Iran. My cases have dealt with extremely serious of concerning issues with all the problems rooted in this corrupt regime. In the last 42 years, the regime has taken the lives of the best children of this land. Many have been brutalized for simple cases like protesting against injustice, unemployment, and poverty. The latest being bloody November in 2019. On this tragic month, thousands of people were killed for protesting sudden 200% increase of fuel prices. The protest started off as a peaceful, very peaceful gathering on the evening of 15th of November. As videos of the protest passed around online through social media, it gone to 21 cities within hours. But unfortunately, eventually becoming very violent from regime as the protests grew to the demand for regime to change. Unfortunately, their calls were ignored. Only violence and tragedy remained. In the generation after revolution, I have dealt with completely new styles of traumas. For example, in my practice, I have dealt with the new generation of LGBTQIA clients. They live in a fear and confusion, mainly from state-sponsored homophobia. In my practice, I have dealt multiple cases of torture survivors. The government bucked, tortured, especially with the political activists over the years. We have entire generation of academics, journalists, and activists tortured in prisons. Their pain and all the families and friends live with them forever, even with extensive therapy. This government has pushed a resource-rich Iran below the poverty line. We are witnessing not only society degrade, but all the wrong circumstantial evidence are also the rise from starvation, corruption, child molestation, child labor, honor killings, and rising suicide rates, shockingly amongst children and families. The latest tragedy, as all you know, of this regime was the Ukrainian plane crash. The Iranian government admitted that the military had indeed shot down the airliner, having mistaken in for a cruise missile and killing all 176 people in 2019. 176 people. We have a very high number of the all grieving parents, partners, and children during all lasting 42 years of these regime crimes. This is a psychological catastrophe resulting in a very sick society. The regime does not care for the people. The people of Iran have a only simple wish from the world journalists and media to report on these matters, to not hide away from any censorships, to speak on the catastrophic violence of human rights, animals, and the environment that the Islamic Republic has committed. The Iranian people said no to this regime at this time. The people boycott the election by staying at home, showing their protest by not voting. And also, Iranian board demonstrated in front of many embassies. only 30% of people voted. This is a great victory for the voice of the protests. By this personal dictatorship, Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei introduced Ibrahim Raisi as a president in silence the surviving people by killing them with more terror. As you know, there are many cases of the killing and massacre of political prisoners by Ibrahim Raisi, which will soon be published in the international community. The dictatorship government of Islamic Republic justifies all its crimes by accusing it of being infidels, troublemakers, and even accused of being spies. As a journalist and media, please show the reality of the ground. Please investigate and work towards the common case of humanity of showing the world how the regime behaves. Silence of your behalf only build up the regime, causing many more years of terrorism and tragedy. We appreciated you having increased support of the people of Iran, not the regime, not the religious dictatorship of Islamic Republic of Iran. Thanks for not only listening, but acting as well.
Thank you so much, Dr. Babak. Our next speaker is joining us from Isfahan. Mohammad Nikbaht is one of the signatories of the Statement of 14 Activists and a living witness of the atrocities of the Islamic Republic.
That is like not even the same Arabic.
من محمد نیکبخت هستم، فعال سیاسی و زندانی سیاسی سابق از ایران و از اصفهان با شما سخن میگویم.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am Mohammad Nikbaht, political activist and former political prisoner, speaking to you from Isfahan, Iran. I was a student in 2005 when I was arrested by security forces, and after 30 months of solitary confinement and torture, I was sentenced by the third branch of the Islamic Revolutionary Court of Isfahan to 8 years imprisonment, which I endured at the Isfahan's Dastegard prison under the most severe circumstances. After my release, I continued my political activism, among them supporting the movement to seek justice for the murdered victims of 1998. That angered the security forces, and on the 21st of November 2017, there was an attempted assassination on my life. On a road around Isfahan, a car cut me off, and a hooded terrorist jumped out and fired 7 bullets, and thinking that he had killed me, left the scene. Fortunately, I survived, but I was wounded in the head, right shoulder, and ribs. After that attempt, I stood in charge with insulting the founder of the Islamic Republic and served another 2-year sentence. If you are looking in from the outside, you may not be able to comprehend the dictatorial nature of the Islamic regime ruling Iran, that masks its vicious actions and policies through duplicity and deception. It is an oppressive dictatorship that does not even allow peaceful protest. The proof of what I am saying is the killing of over 1,500 peaceful demonstrators that were gunned down by the security forces. Their families continue to mourn their loved ones and seek justice for their spilled blood What we face here in Iran is a system that is much like that of ISIS, an Islamic caliphate that is possibly more ominous than ISIS because it is an ideological mafia that has ensnared a very wealthy country with huge natural resources. My request from the U.S. government and key figures in its policy-making apparatus is to place human rights issues on the top of any agenda or negotiations with this regime. But first, I must say that negotiations with this regime, whatever the subject, be it nuclear, missiles, regional affairs, will not amount to much because the foreign policy of the Islamic Republic is based on duplicity. If your intent is to bring stability to the region, then you must focus on human rights in Iran. Using human rights to pressure the regime will produce results because they are not capable of suppressing the entire nation. I want you to understand the essence and the character of this regime. They have a constitution based on the rule of the jurisprudent, which is a more horrible version of the Islamic Caliphate that during its 42 years rule has managed to solidify its position, loot the nation's coffers, and become a main source of insecurity in the region and across the world. In this very sensitive period in history, please stay on the side of the people of Iran. Iranian people have confidence and trust in the American people and the American government. I beseech you to honor this trust and to stay on the side of the Iranian people. If you ignore human rights or devalue its importance, the Iranian people will suffer irreparable losses and will cause them to lose confidence in the American people. Thank you.
سراسر منطقه را به آشوب کشید. پاینده و پیروز باشید.
I know we're having a little bit of noise problems on Zoom, so I apologize for that. It's a technical problem with the press club, so we apologize for the disruptions. Our next speaker will be joining us via Zoom, Parviz Dasmalchi from Berlin, I believe. And he's a human rights activist, author of over 20 books, historian, and escaped an assassination attempt at the Mykonos restaurant in Berlin, along with 4 Kurdish leaders who were murdered. He is the author of Terror in the Name of God, and he will be discussing with us today. Thank you.
با سلام به همه و سپاس فراوان از برگزار کنندگان جلسه که این وقت و امکان رو در اختیار من گذاشتن. موضوع صحبت من اینجا تروریسم حکومتی جمهوری اسلامی. زمان کوتاه و من بسیار فشرده سخن خواهم گفت. چرا این موضوع رو انتخاب کردم؟ به دلیل اینکه تروریسم حکومتی جمهوری اسلامی از سیستم حکومت دینی ایران جدا ناپذیره. از زمان تشکیل این حکومت یعنی 43 سال پیش وجود داشته، امروز وجود داره و در آینده هم به نظر من وجود خواهد داشت. برای اینکه تروریسم حکومتی جمهوری اسلامی یک ضرورت برای حفظ نظام تروریسمی هست که در 2 جهت عمدتاً عمل میکنه، یکی علیه مخالفان خودش و یکی هم علیه بیرون کشورهای دیگه، به ویژه علیه امریکا و یا اسرائیل و غیره. من در اینجا
So we lost audio. We lost audio.
ببخشید من برای یک لحظه میکروفونم قطع شده بود و
Sorry, I lost audio right now.
کجا شنیده شد. به هر حال دلیل دیگه این که من این رو انتخاب کردم، این موضوع رو، این که ابراهیم رئیسی
The other reason I chose this topic is because Ibrahim Raisi was appointed president 33 years ago. He was responsible for over 10,000 political prisoners, murders, deaths of over 10,000 prisoners. And it's a shame that such a person can become president.
در واقع عملکردش چگونه است.
It shows
پس از اینکه
the government's true nature.
بنیادگرایان اسلامی در 43 سال پیش در ایران قدرت گرفتن، شخصیت‌های بسیار زیادی سیاستمداران در ایران و یا اینکه
scores of Iranians and dissidents were murdered.
در درون ایران و بیرون ایران
journalists were murdered.
همواره این صحبت بود که به غیر از ابتدای جریان که حکومت جمهوری اسلامی رسما اعلام میکرد که کار اونهاست، بعداً همواره اعلام میکرد که
the leadership of the Islamic Republic would whitewash the stories that came out about their murderous acts and always blamed it on groups that were not associated with them.
و این جریان همچنان ادامه داشت تا اینکه
This policy continued until the Berlin assassination that came to be known as the Mykonos assassinations.
4 نفر به قتل رسیدن که 3 نفرشون از رهبران
people were assassinated and three of the 4 were leaders of the Iranian Kurdish Democratic Party.
کسانی که مستقیما در قتل دخالت داشتن دستگیر شدن به
following the act of terror a group of perpetrators were arrested. Among them there was 1 Iranian and 3 Lebanese. There was a court case in Germany.
این دادگاه حدود 4 سال طول کشید، به 3 زبان مختلف فارسی، آلمانی و عربی ترجمه میشد.
The case went on for 4 years. They brought in 180 witnesses, all kinds of witnesses, from eyewitnesses to professors to all kinds of people. What's important here is that I'm going to read to you the conclusion of the court. It's a 400-page long document, but I'm going to read you the headlines of the court case. So it's not my view, this is what the court ordered, what the court revealed.
ببینید نتایج بررسی و تحقیقات دادگاه پس از 4 سال
court's investigation revealed that as long as Ayatollah Khomeini was alive,
دستورهای مربوط به قتل
every decision about killing or assassinations was taken, had to be approved by him personally. And after he died in 1989, Ali Khamenei succeeded him and continued the same policy.
حکومت دینی ایران شد، یک شورایی تشکیل داد به نام شورای
Khamenei created an organ called a Special Affairs Council that was responsible to deal with the elimination of the opposition inside Iran and outside. I will read you a few lines from the conclusion of the court.
این شورا دارای اعضای ثابت و متغیر است.
The council has permanent and temporary members. This organ has and the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, is the one that decides who who sits on the council and what they decide. The members are the leader himself or his representative,
که در اون زمان ترور علی اکبر هاشمی رفسنجانی
the president of the country, at that time it was Rafsanjani, the minister of information and security, the foreign minister, the commander of the Revolutionary Guard,
و یک نفر عضو شورای نگهبان از مشتهدان شورای نگهبان که در اون زمان در زمان ترور
at that time was
آیت الله خزعلی از طرف شورای نگهبان عضو این شورای امور ویژه بود. در متن حکم دادگاه بسیار روشن
The verdict makes clear that the decision to eliminate the opponents
دگراندیشان و مخالفان رژیم و ترورها در اختیار نهادی به نام شورای امور ویژه است و اعضای آن عبارتند از رئیس جمهور، وزیر اطلاعات و امنیت، وزیر امور خارجه، رؤسای نیروهای نظامی و انتظامی و همچنین خود رهبر مذهبی نظام. دادگاه دلیل و انگیزه ترور دگراندیشان و ترورها رو صرفاً سیاسی و مربوط به حفظ قدرت سیاسی می‌داند که صرفاً با انگیزه سیاسی و با هدف نابودی مخالفان رژیم انجام گرفته. هدف اصلی رژیم ایران نابودی مخالفان و دگراندیشان فعال نظام در خارج از کشور است. این توجه بکنید که دادگاه رسما و علنا در یک حکم 400 صفحه‌ای و پس از 4 سال بررسی و پس از شنیدن بیش از 180 کارشناس و شهود دیگه ارشدترین مقامات جمهوری اسلامی رو به عنوان آمران دستوردهندگان تروریسم حکومتی ایران ازش نام میبرد و علیه علی فلاحیان یعنی وزیر اطلاعات و امنیت وقت اون زمان در 4 مارس 1996 حکم دستگیری و بازداشت صادر
A warrant was issued for the arrest of the Minister of Information and Security of the Islamic Republic of Iran, who at that time was Ali Fallahian. The verdict is still valid. I believe, based on this court's verdict in Berlin, arrest warrants can be issued against other leaders of the Islamic Republic to investigate the role in these unfortunate
قتل شامل مرور زمان نمیشه و هر زمان میتوان پرونده رو باز کرد. از نظر قضایی چون علی خامنه‌ای اکبر ولایتی که عملاً وزیر امور خارجه مقام رهبری
the foreign minister, Ali Akbari Velayati, was found guilty. And this case can be reopened and still can be brought into justice.
که در اینجا مسئله بر سر یک تصمیم سیاسی آلمان هست برای گذاشتن این مسئله.
The problem right now is that this is a political decision by the government of Germany not to pursue the case. The Islamic Republic is one of the worst systems in the world that's playing with the future of the Iranian people, with the faith of the Iranian people. As long as they survive, no one will rest in peace in the Middle East, in Iran, or around the world. Thank you very much. I appreciate this time.
Thank you, Mr. Dasmalchi, for your comments. Our next speaker will be joining us from Tehran, Yasamin Hanifeh. Yasamin was imprisoned for visiting the tomb of Cyrus the Great.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. With my greetings, my name is Yasmin Hanifeh and I'm a political prisoner in Iran, and I'm going to tell you what happened to me. I was arrested on 7/98 or 29 of October 2019 on my way to Pasargad on Cyrus the Great Day. A few kilometers before we arrived, about 50 of security forces, uniformed forces, attacked me and my car. And they physically held me and took me to a desert and interrogated and tortured me for 11 hours. And finally, Fars Province Attorney General visited me and informed me that I was charged with leading a terrorist group I was accused of. So, they transferred me in a sack blown forward to Emin Prison 209 section about 3 a.m., 3 after midnight. All my friends were released a few hours later, but they lied to my friends that I was released also. Nobody knew where I was or what happened to me, not even my family. They kidnapped me. Islamic Republic kidnapped people. At the time, I had no idea where I was because I couldn't see anywhere or anyone. But I was in 219 section in a solitary cell. There was a projector light always on. There was no daylight. I was under interrogating and torture hours a day. And they told me I was going to get executed and I was a terrorist like Abdul Malik Regi. And if I confess, I would get released from pain. It wasn't just white torture, it was black torture, it was pure torture. They inflicted too much physical and mental pain on me. They insulted me too much. They told me I have to give them, I must give them all details of my private life. There are so many things I can't even tell. I lost about 10 kilograms there. I lost my heart. After a month, my mom saw me. I was like an skeleton. I was 47 kilograms. They put too much pressure on me to give in, to interview, to collaborate, like a television interview, like so many others before, but I didn't give in. So finally, after months, I got released on a bail of 800 million tovans.
Did we lose the video? Or is it over? It's over. Okay. Thank you. It was a little abrupt. Okay, so now it's my turn. I could stand here and tell you all about myself and all the things that I've done, but today I choose not to. I've had the privilege of serving as a spokesperson for the Confederation of Iranian Students. I've served alongside of activists in the National Iranian Congress. I've had the privilege of briefing policymakers all over the world. And I could choose 1,000 words today to tell you about human rights in Iran, but today I choose to use my voice to tell the story of a young lady who is in Tehran today. Hello, my name is Mari Mohammadi. I am a Farsi-speaking Christian human rights activist. I am speaking to you from Tehran. I have only lived 22 years, never committed a crime. However, I have been arrested 4 times. Once I was imprisoned for 6 months, another time sentenced to 91 days with 10 lashes, and another 2 times I was arrested for improper Islamic hijab. I have also been deprived of the right to work, further my education. These detentions and deprivations are only part of the persecution that has been inflicted on me. It is because I am a Farsi-speaking Christian and I want to live and practice my Christian faith. I do not want to be indifferent to injustice. I want to fight against oppression and discrimination. The regime of the Islamic Republic does not tolerate justice and hardly tolerates my body. This body is only allowed to breathe, and there is no guarantee that it will not suffocate my body tomorrow, as well as my freedoms and rights. I am only one of at least 1 million Farsi-speaking Christians in Iran, an unrecognized religious minority who has endured pressure and persecution. The regime only officially recognizes Assyrian and Armenian Christians as a religious group and considers Farsi-speaking Christians as a religious minority. From its inception, 43 years ago, the Islamic Republic has spared no effort to eliminate Farsi-speaking Christians in Iran, from cultural activities to imprisonment, flogging, exile, and even murder. For example, Christians in Iran do not have the right to communicate and connect with other believers, even on social media. Recently, many Christians were summoned and threatened with imprisonment for having normal conversations on social media. Female Christians are forced to comply with the compulsory Islamic law of wearing hijab in all public places. Otherwise, they will be arrested and imprisoned. Christians are tried and convicted according to Islamic Sharia law, and we are considered infidels. Christians do not have the right to study or work. Among them are 2 teenage children of Reverend Youssef Nadarkhani, who is in prison, and whose children have been denied the right to an education. Christians do not have the right to have a formal church or building. They must form house churches in order to worship. But unfortunately, the government considers home churches a security threat and has sent a very large number of Christians to long-term prison sentences, including Nasser Navard Goltape, who was sentenced to 10 years in prison and is currently serving his 4th year. When we are detained, we faced interrogation, sexual, psychological, and physical torture, along with forced taped confessions. Christians are sentenced to imprisonment for both attending a house church and for participating in Christian service. For example, prisoner Sahib Fadai and Johan Omidi, currently exiled, were flogged 80 times each for participating in a worship service and charged multiple times for the same so-called crime. It is illegal to be charged twice for the same crime. Christians do not have the right to have custody of their adopted children. Maryam Falahi and Sam Khosravi are a Christian couple who the court has ruled that the child they adopted should be separated from his Christian parents. In addition, they have been deprived of the right to work and have been fined and exiled. Christians do not have permission to assemble and have a church, also do not have the right to perform burials in a Christian manner. For example, the wife of Ismail Maghrebi Nejad, who was sentenced to prison, lost his wife years ago, but the government forced him to bury her in a Muslim cemetery. Christians do not have the right to perform marriages in a Christian ceremony and therefore are not officially registered. Farsi-speaking Christians have no representation in the Islamic Parliament. The Islamic Parliament wears the mask of freedom and equality, however inwardly is full of corruption, where anti-human rights decisions are made. The printing and the sale of Bibles and Christian books in Farsi, the official language of Iran, is prohibited. The Islamic Republic has confiscated, closed, and demolished the construction of official churches over the past 43 years. It has serially martyred many Christian leaders in the most heinous way, including Hossein Soudmand, Mehdi Dibaj, Ravan Bakhsh Yousefi, Arastu Saye, and Qurban Turani. It goes without saying that even Christian shrines are not safe from the destruction and aggression of the Islamic Republic. For example, martyred Hossein Soudmand, who was executed by the regime 31 years ago for his beliefs, was buried in an abandoned grave without a headstone for his name or a mere symbol. A year and a half ago, without prior notice, the regime poured 0.5 meter of soil at his burial site in order to diminish his existence. They even painted over the white cross that his family had painted to mark his grave. The regime uses propaganda via film, TV, commercials, theater, and books to intentionally instigate hatred toward Christians in Iranian society. They also brainwash children at school to provoke that hatred. The Islamic Republic lies not only to the international community, but to its own people, with a smile on its face, all the while pretending it knows freedom and equality and justice, of which it does not even know the definition of. But inwardly and in action, it believes that everyone is equal, but some are more equal. In 2020, the Islamic Republic was the number 8 world persecutor of Christians, full of hypocrisy and lies, as Jesus Christ said. You are like whitewashed tombs that have a beautiful appearance, but inside are full of the bones of the dead and all kinds of filth. My request to the esteemed journalists present at this meeting is to pay more attention to the news related to the conditions and cases of violations of the rights of Farsi-speaking Christians in Iran, and to inform the world about the situation of this religious minority. These things that I have stated are only a small part of the persecution of Farsi-speaking Christians in Iran. I must emphasize that although Assyrian and Armenian Christians are officially recognized by this regime, they too face discrimination and persecution. Please awaken the conscience of those who have turned a blind eye to oppression and tyranny, and please pursue justice for the crimes against humanity. Thank you, and God bless you. And finally, I want to honor all those that are still in prison today. I want to honor Arjang Davudi, the longest serving political prisoner in Iran. He served 20 years in prison for his political activities and has faced heinous torture at the hands of this regime. Thank you. Our next speaker is Dr. Zafar Mehr, former political prisoner, researcher in humanities, and activist.
درود بسیار دارم خدمت تک تک عزیزانی که در این نشست حضور دارند و سپاس ویژه از
Greetings and thank you for organizing and attending this event. I am glad there are journalists and members of the media who are concerned about the violations of human rights in Iran. As a researcher in humanities and a human rights activist, my main objective is to focus on the causes of the situation in Iran rather than to fix them. To start with, I have to say that none of the 30 principles of human rights articles are observed in Iran. I try to share my view on the roots of this issue, and I'd like to pose a couple of questions. Number one, can human rights be observed where the Constitution is not based on the principles of human rights? Can a society thrive where public wisdom is entirely ignored? I guess we should revisit the definition of the law again. What is law and who are the lawmakers? I would like to put this question to the scholars, intellectuals, the human rights activists, and democracy seekers. Can a law not based on the principles of human rights be called a law? Can a law that has not arisen from the people's will be called a law? I hope all Iranian activists, researchers, and those engaged in seeking democracy answer this simple question with sincerity and devoid of double standards. Then we may be able to take a step forward in getting a grasp of the current situation. Today, we have some people in Iran who speak of human rights, but not about the laws that are against human rights. They talk about democracy, but they don't stand by its definition in a way that includes the will of the people. Many of the same people deliberately ignore these main issues and contradictions, and they busy themselves with marginal issues. As a human rights activist, I believe my fellow activists must seek to reduce the suffering of the people caused by the human right violation. Thank you.
من فعلا بدرود میگم و هستم برای گفتگوهای بعدی اگر فرصتی بود. بدرود.
Thank you. Okay, our next speaker is joining us from Los Angeles. Shukriya Bodasti. I'm sorry if I've pronounced your name wrong. Forgive me.
Kind of.
Brodost. Forgive me.
Here you go.
PhD student in international security at Virginia Tech University. Her research focuses on security and identity politics in the Middle East. She'll be speaking about Iran between national and transnational security interests. Forgive me for mispronouncing your name.
It's okay. It's happened many times. Hello, everyone. It's really honor and privilege to speak to you. After listening from most of the speaker, for me, it's really hard to focus on my topic today. Unfortunately, when you're talking in Iran, there is a lot of pain. So when it's coming to our people, the academic who's talking about some specific area is real difficult to focus and to stay away from emotion, but I will try my best. As a woman from minorities ethno-religious community whose identity already is securitized and marginalized by the Islamic regime, I'm here today to talk about Islamic regime's national security discourse. I do believe if we just address this discourse, we can answer most of the question and most of what the speakers today, they talk about Iran security and what's going on in this country, all these humans right abuser or this brutal behavior of the regime can be answered if we address this discourse or this concept of the national security. Most of us, we are familiar with this concept. We know when we're talking about the national security, it's been described as a government responsibility to protect the people of these countries, the economy, the food security, the environmental security, the energy security. All is the government responsibility. It is what we have as a definition of the national security. But when it comes to the Iran regime, what we have in this country as a national security, we may hear 1,000 times when the regimes, people, or even the regime, when they talk about the national security, they may tell us, okay, Amniyat Milli. But what is really Amniyat Milli or national security in this country? We know the since establishment of this regime, the regime gives the definition of the national security as a Hifz Amniyat Nizam, which means the protecting security of the regime. So when you have this concept for this regime since 1979, is clearly the only goal of this regime to protect the Nizam, to protect the regime. And this explanation or this definition of national security by the regime underpins the regime's entire domestic and regional policy. But at the same time, they use national security as a pretext to justify its ideological and military presence in the region too. For instance, the high-rank commander of the IRGC, Rahim Naim Aqdam, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, he says that if we don't fight in Syria and Iraq, we have to fight in Iran. So in this statement, he's trying to say what we're doing in the region is to fight and protect Iranian people, because if we don't fight in the Iraq and Syria, they come and attack people of Iran. But at the same time, another commander of the IRGC, his statement is really interesting. I'm sure you are interested to know what is the other commander's statement is. He's talking about if the protecting of the Syria is more important than protecting of Khuzestan province in Iran, which is the high-rank commander of the IRGC, Mehdi Taib. He says that. So in this case, when we're talking about the nation security, the Iranian security doesn't matter for the IRGC. Here, Syria comes first, then Khuzestan, the province of Iran, comes second. Maybe second, I don't know if even the final stage for them to protect. So for Iranian regime, the internal and transnational security are equivalent, which is in the both cases, the aim is protecting the Shia Islamic regime. So what is the result of this policy or this definition that I just introduced you to, that definition of the concept of the national security? And the result is that this regime has really been successful on that matter, which we can see as a result of the socio-political space in Iran. The regime has lost its legitimacy and even the support by the dominant Shia population, which we saw it after this last election. The turn of the election was the lowest since we had. I know we have the lowest turnout. It was 40 something, if I'm not wrong about the number. But this one is the most last low turnout of the election in Iran, which shows how this regime lost the legitimacy. And secondly, the crumbling economic condition. I will add not just economic condition, the environmental condition, the food condition, the security of each individual. If we want to talk about the individual security, is a part of the national security, that the government have to protect each individual, the freedom of the life and freedom of the speech. We don't have that kind of right in Iran as an individual. None of the Iranians are secure in their daily life. So regime failed already in that responsibility too. And thirdly, diplomatic isolation. If you look at the Islamic regime, we can see this regime not just diplomatic isolated from the global relation with the international relation, it been isolated from the domestic relation too. And the last but not least, the regime lost popularity in the region among the Shia believers, specifically in the majority Shia populated country like Iraq, and specifically in the city, which is the center of the Shia believers like Karbala and Najaf. We know thousands of the Shia protests in Iraq. They march against Iran interfering in this country. They're asking Iran to leave this country. What this tell us that since the 1979, this regime tried the best to protect its own security by always putting the country on the alarming policy. Like we always in the danger, the Islamic regime of the Iran always saying that we have an enemy, outside enemy, they're trying to destroy us. We have to protect the regime. So that's tell us even they fail in protecting themselves too. So now what we have in Iran, I do believe we can say that the remaining supporter of the regime are just militia group in the region and the IRGC. And we know even IRGC is nothing in the IRGC is related to the Iranian. We know that the meaning of this force is a protector of the Islamic regime. So this both group that I mentioned, militia group in the region and the IRGC inside of the Iran, they both supporting this regime. But we know this support is not coming because they believe of that ideology of the Shiaism or the Islamic regime. They support this regime because of economic interests. Each of this group, if they find another master to provide them the support, I'm sure they will follow a different master. So in this case, we can conclude that Islamic regime is a fragile and a failed state that securitize all aspects of Iranian life under the name of the national security, which is far away from this concept. I just tried to in short way to explain and to address this concept of national security. So when we're talking about what's going on in Iran against the human right, against the ethnic group, against the religious minority, we have to first understand the concept of the national security by this regime being established and been following to protect the regime or Hifz Amniyat Nizam is a main point to understand all this brutal behavior that the regimes is doing against human rights, not just in Iran, in the region. We know thousands of the Syrian kids, thousands of the family, they lost their life in Syria because the Islamic regime support for the Bashar Assad regime. We know thousands of the Iraqi oppositions, the journalists, the activists in Iraq even being killed by Shia militia group in Iran, and even their family cannot raise their voice against this assassination because of the Islamic regime's prison in this country. So when we're talking about this regime, we're just not talking about this regime's brutal behavior against Iranian. We're talking about the regime that the act of this regime, the behavior of this regime is against all humanity in these days. I don't want to go far talk about the regime's support for the terrorist group in the Europe. That European country feels that danger. But we want to wait and see how they're going to handle the regime's increasing terrorist activities in the Europe during this Vienna talk, and let's see really they're gonna wake up and put some limited or stop this regime, or they're going to shake hand with the evil and continue it, and given the power on the regime that is already in the last, I do believe in the last stage, and is a fragile, that if the humanity, if the global power standing with the human right in Iran, with the people of Iran, the regime not going to survive for longer. Thank you very much for inviting me for this event, and I'm really glad to be here. I try to make a short statement and short explanation about what's going on in Iran and about the national security. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Appreciate the time you put forward today. Our next speaker will be joining us via Zoom from Iran. He is a political prisoner and activist, Mr. Hishmat Tabarzadeh.
خانم ها و آقایان، درود بر شما باد. من میخوام در مورد نقض حقوق بشر در قانون و عملکرد
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. I want to briefly discuss human rights violations that are inherent in the laws of Velayat Faqih, which are currently the governing principles in Iran. I am speaking to you as a journalist, human rights activist, and a political dissident residing in Iran. And I need to emphasize that essentially freedom of speech, equality of citizens' rights do not exist in Iran. Systematic violations of human rights of all sorts, be it gender inequality, linguistics discrimination, or religious practices disparity, are officially embedded in the Constitution of the Islamic Republic regime. There is no freedom of speech or freedom of choice. It is a system very much similar to that of the Taliban. For example, women cannot become presidents or judges, and their share of inheritance and blood money is half that of men. The law also discriminates against followers of other religions, such as the Baha'i faith, Christian converts, and Sufis, which is the Islamic mystic sects. I am a former political prisoner who did time for over 12 years in prison and spent nearly 3 of those years in solitary confinement. I was tortured and witnessed many others being tortured and executed. In Iran today, a small minority of population continue to support the regime and enjoy all the rights and privileges. The majority have no rights. In the recent so-called election, they announced Ibrahim Raisi, a proven uneducated murderer, to run while they disqualified some of their former accomplices. More than 90% of the population did not take part in the sham election. This regime is responsible for instability in the region and is a threat to the world. They take American and European citizens hostage and demand ransom for their release. Despite all these types of crimes, the United States and European governments continue to deal with this regime and tolerate its systematic violations of human rights. There are many people in Iran's prisons right now. They are kept in prison just for expressing their views and for opposing the Islamic Republic regime. I implore this honorable audience, particularly members of the media, to bring it to the attention of the world, the brutality and viciousness of this regime against its own citizens. Now that the Iranian people have risen and launched their great national boycott movement, they expect the free world to hear their voices. Thank you.
هم به گوش جهانیان برسانید و محکوم کنید. مردم ایران انتظار دارن از دنیای آزاد، انتظار جدی دارن. حال که جنبش ملی تحریم رو به راه انداختن، صدای ملت ایران در سراسر گیتی شنیده بشه. پاینده باشید و برقرار. بدرود.
We have Mr. Ibrahim Ahrari from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. He'll be speaking on the rights of Sunnis in Iran. Minority rights are violated in the Constitution of the Islamic Republic.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحیم. قبل از اینکه صحبتامو رو بخوام در این کنفرانس آغاز بکنم، لازمه که از رسانه آوا تودی و تمام عزیزانی که این فرصت رو فراهم کردن تا بتونم دقایقی در خدمت خبرنگاران امریکایی و اروپایی باشیم در مورد اونچه که بر اهل سنت ایران گذشته.
I want to inform the media about what
خیلی سریع و گذرا
how the Sunni minorities
نکته‌های کلیدی اشاره خواهم کرد و چنانچه در کنفرانس سوالی داشتن خبرنگاران و اصحاب رسانه در غرب، در خدمتشون برای پاسخگویی حاضر خواهم بود به صورت نمونه‌ای و مثالی. اما
I'll answer any questions
ترکیب
that the media may have
با اهل سنت
if they would send it to
توجه به
me.
اینکه نگذاشتن آمارگیری بشه از بعد از انقلاب، یعنی آمارگیری مذهبی باشه،
The Islamic regime is not allowed.
تا 25 میلیون جمعیت اهل سنت ایران هست به صورت پراکنده در استان‌های سیستان بلوچستان، استان خراسان، استان گلستان، استان گیلان، آذربایجان شرقی، آذربایجان غربی، کردستان، کرمانشاه، خوزستان، بخشایی از استان ایلام و کرکروی بوئراحمد و هرمزگان، بوشه
The Islamic Republic does not allow statistics to be gathered about the various ethnicities in Iran, and about religious minorities in Iran. He just named all the provinces in Iran that have minorities in them.
نقض حقوق اهل سنت ایران همین عدم آمارگیری است که از ابتدای انقلاب نخواستند.
Simply not taking the right statistics is
حالا بر اساس این
trampling on their rights, on the rights of the minorities.
ایران بعد از شیعیان هستیم.
The Sunnis are the second largest religious groups in Iran after the Shiites.
رئیس جمهور باید تابع مذهب رسمی کشور باشه.
But then the Constitution,
مذهب رسمی کشور
Article 12 of the Constitution says that the president must be a Shiite, a 12th Imami Shiite.
از این
and cancels off the rights of the rest of the people of the country that are not Shiites.
علیه ملت ایران برداشته شده. در اصل 5 بحث ولایت مطلقه فقیه در اصل 5 قانون اساسی ایران و اصل 5 اشاره می‌کنه که 3 قوه اساسی ایران، قوه مقننه، قوه مجریه و قوه قضاییه زیر نظر ولایت مطلقه فقیه هست. دقت میکنید حتی اینا آسمانی میدونن. این نشون دهنده اینه که دیگه و سایر ادیان و گروه های دیگه ایران حقی در هیچ برپسی ندارن. ضمن اینکه یک فرد بر کل گروه ایران حاکمیت داره. جالب اینه که در اصل 110 قانون اساسی وقتی وظایف و اختیارات رهبر رو توصیف میکنه میبینید همه نیروها و قوا درون کشور در دست رهبر هست، حتی تعیین سیاست‌های صدا و سیما و تعیین ریاست صدا و سیمای کشوری. حالا تصور با این موضوع از بعد از انقلاب اهل سنت ایران از همه رده‌های لشکری و کشوری اخراج شدند، خیلی ها اعدام شدند و بلافاصله ما شاهد این بودیم که به صورت نردبانی و پلکانی اعدام‌هایی در ارتباط با اهل سنت صورت گرفت. رهبران، نخبگان، فعالان سیاسی و این نکته‌ای بود که اینجا زمانی بود که دیگه اهل سنت به صورت میشه گفت قطره‌چکانی یا پلکانی این سالها مورد ستم و مظلومیت و نقض حقوق بشر در ارتباط با شخصیت‌های شاخص و سیاسی و اجتماعی و مذهبی مواجه شد. یا زندان شدن، اعدام شدن، تبعید شدن، به هجرت رفتن و به نوعی ترور شدن که ما شاید صدها موارد هست که در این فرصت کوتاه نمیشه بهش اشاره بکنیم. مساجد اهل سنت و مدارس دینی در خیلی از شهرها
Sunnis are not allowed to build Sunni mosques or schools or Sunni religious schools in most of the cities of the country.
اشاره بکنیم و کشتار نمازگزاران در مسجد مکی در همون روز یعنی 22 بهمن 1372 نکته دیگری که از نظر حقوق بشری کاملا نقض کننده حقوق اهل سنت و اون رده‌های امنیتی که برای استخدام حتی برای معلمین قرار دادن تا رده‌های دیگه مگر افرادی که به قول معروف طی شرایط خاص تونستن نفوذ بکنن یا بالاخره در اون لحظه انکار کردن عقیدهشون رو یا در شرایطی قرار گرفتن تونستن استخدام
teachers and other employees of the government
حتی امروز در
if they said they were Sunnis, they'd be dismissed unless they lied and did not say what their religion was. Even in Tehran, we don't have a mosque in Tehran. Even though they have promised us many times that they would allow us to.
نه نظامی است جمهوری و نه نظامی است اسلامی است. قوانین اون
نه با Islamic Republic is neither Islamic nor a republic.
و نه با قانون و اعلامیه جهانی حقوق بشر بلکه بر اساس قوانین نجات پرستانه فرقه گرایانه و آپارتاید. نکته دیگری که ما میتونیم بهش اشاره بکنیم اهل سنت در مساجد و مدارس دینی خلاف اصل 12 قانون اساسی که گفته بودن اهل سنت آزاد هست آزادی ندارن
do not have any freedoms even though the article 12 of the constitution is supposed to have given them those rights.
و نمیتونن آزادانه سخنرانی داشته باشن.
They cannot speak freely, they cannot
بازداشت میشن و
practice their religion freely.
و موضوعی خیلی مهم که اهل سنت نمیتونه رئیس جمهور باشه جدا از اینکه اهل سنت نمیتونه وزیر باشه در پست‌های و رده‌های بالای امنیتی قرار بگیره حتی در استانداری‌ها اهل سنت نمیتونه در رده‌های بالا قرار بگیره اینی که ما در این سال‌ها اصلا استاندار سنی نداشتیم.
So in these years we've never had a Sunni governor of any province.
اهل سنت اون هم در یک شرایط خیلی محدود خاص داشتیم. یعنی همین اینها نشان دهنده نقض
extremely small exceptions to this rule, but
علیه اهل سنت ایران استفاده شده
violation of their rights is dominant.
بهشون زده شده. ابتدا اهل سنت رو به نام اینکه اینها طاغوتی هستن وابسته به رژیم سلطنتی قبل هستن سرکوب کردن بعدها اینها رو به کنفرانس طائف که صلح بین اسرائیل و عرب بود متهم کردن بعدها اینها رو به اتهام وهابیت و همینجوری تا اخیراً که به نام داعشیت و وابسته به اسرائیل و وابسته به امریکا اینها رو متهم میکنن و سرکوب میکنن چه در داخل کشور و چه در
Sunnis are suppressed because they're called Wahhabis. They've been accused of supporting the ISIS, of being royalists. They've been accused of everything which is really false about them.
Thank you. Okay, so our final speaker, my friend Ali Jama Mardi, is here today. He is the producer of Ava Today, former foreign correspondent, anchor of nightly news at Voice of America Persian Service, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, and a target of failed kidnapping attempt. And he also has done a wonderful job in educating Iranians inside of Iran about news that's going on in the outside world. Ali, please come.
Thank you so much. Thank you for everybody. Ladies and gentlemen, many thanks to all who are present as well as to our many virtual guests on social media and TV channels. I really apologize. We had some problem in Zoom by National Club moderate. I'm so sorry about that. Anyway, this is maybe first meeting after COVID-19 here, so we are lucky. Our goal today was to share with our journalist friends stories by a representative view from Iran, as they say, from the horse's mouth. I sincerely hope that this has helped to understand the severity situation in Iran, to that you notice and cover the continuous and systematic violation of human rights in Iran. Statistics reflect the continued violation of human rights and the ever-increasing oppression of the Islamic Republic authorities against the Iranian people. The regime tries hard to portray a positive face to the world, but the truth is that their fascist is no less than ISIS or Taliban or any other terroristic fundamental groups in the Middle East or at the world. For example, at the same time that Adnan Khashoggi, the Saudi Arabian journalist, was murdered in Turkey, the security agents of the Islamic Republic kidnapped Ruhollah Zam, an Iranian journalist working in Paris. They conspired to lure him to Baghdad, kidnapped him there, and drove him to Tehran. After months of torture, he was executed, unfortunately. His crime was only writing and talking about the reality of the rule of the mullahs in Iran on his Telegram channel. In Khashoggi's case, American media followed the story day and night, but unfortunately not a word was devoted to Ruhollah Zam's kidnapping, torture, and execution. It is important to note that Zam was only one of tens of Iranian journalists murdered by Mullah regime. Just last Wednesday, the Islamic regime murdered 2 Iranian women journalists, Mahshad Karimi and Reyhaneh Yassini. Their crime criticizing the regime about the issues that concern the Iranian people. Other speakers today have covered all the various crimes and infractions of human rights laws that his regime commits on a daily basis. No one is spared, but there was single out women, ethnics, and religion minorities. Based video reported and verified documents, most Iranians did not participate in what the regime called presidential election. They nominated and literally anointed a person notorious for his murders. Ebrahim Raisi, according to the regime's documents, has ordered the murder of thousands innocent dissidents. Again, American media unfortunately pays little attention to such details and only mention it in passing. A government that does not honor its own citizens' right and is a continuous violator of international law and tries to build nuclear weapon is not trustworthy. I hope that President Biden's administration understand this truth. Any agreement with the Islamic Republic is similar to Chamberlain's agreement with Adolf Hitler. Agreement with this regime will neither guarantee the interest of the United States, nor the world, nor the Iranian people. It is absolutely essential that in any negotiation with Islamic Republic, the U.S. place human rights to top of the agenda. We request American media to show some sensitivity to the violation of human rights in Iran. Your support will be greatly appreciated by Iranian people. Thanks again, especially many thanks to Mr. Bahman Malizadeh from Nowruz Foundation as supporting this symposium. Hope we'll see you in another symposium in Washington. Thank you so much for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming today. If there are any questions from the audience, we will pass around a microphone for you to ask. Is there an ability for those that are joining on Zoom to ask questions? Yes? No? I see. Okay, if there's any questions from the audience, we'd be happy to take them for the speakers. No questions. Okay, let's eat. Thank you all.